Hello and welcome to another Industry Careers for PhDs podcast brought to you by Cheeky Scientist. I'm your host, Isaiah Henkel, and today we will be talking with David Llewellyn on startup R&D positions. As always, if you'd like to get access to the full interview and get insights that you can't get here, go to cheekyscientist.com/association and sign up on that page. You'll also learn how to get access to our complete job search blueprint for PhDs, as well as our private job referral network for PhDs. If you'd like to have these podcasts delivered to your email inbox, as well as our free articles, just go to cheekyscientist.com, our homepage, and sign up with your name and email address at the bottom of that page. You can also listen to our other podcasts on iTunes at any time. So once again, we'll be talking with David Llewellyn today on startup R&D positions. So we'll jump in and get started now. So thank you very much for being with us today, David.
No worries at all. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so there was just like I mentioned, a very big need or desire to learn more about working in startups, especially within R&D. Most of the people listening have PhDs or on their way to get PhDs, and many of them are, have at least a STEM slant. So it's good to have you on here, and I guess the best place to start is maybe you can kind of help us understand, what it's like to work in a startup. Maybe give us a little bit of the background of your story, how you transitioned into a startup versus, going straight to Johnson & Johnson or working, in corporate. Why'd you make that decision? Why you transitioned out of academia? Maybe you can just give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably like many of the people listening here today, I'd started through academia, and for me at least, had really always assumed that was what I'd do. I really liked science, and I really liked asking interesting questions. I also liked being in the lab and or in the field. And so I was really passionate about doing that and thought, academia was probably the way to do that, and had certainly had a good time doing that as well. I guess then through the PhD, I sort of started thinking about other options. Not that I didn't want to go into academia. In fact, one day maybe I'll go back in that direction. But just started thinking about other things, other opportunities. And certainly one of those that popped up was the idea of doing some research in a company rather than at a university or a government research organization. And so the first big question the question that I had for myself was, I don't know if I could really do that. I don't know if I've got an idea which is good enough to go out on our own and try that. But really just with the other guy, Joe, who I co-founded DJS Antibodies with, we just sat around in the lab at the pub, on the weekend, chatting about science, chatting about ideas. And it was through that we really formed this idea that, hey, we could start a company, we could use the skills that we'd attained and go and do that. And so from there, from very humble beginnings of just an idea, DJS grew and continues to grow. And so, to your question of what does a day look like for me at the moment, still DJS is two of us, so Joe and myself, but we do a whole range of different things. So a day could look like anything from starting in the lab, doing cell culture, immunizing mice, working with antibodies, right through to meetings with investors, going to big international industry conferences, talking with some of the world's largest pharma firms about their programs, pitching our ideas, seeing if we can get people interested, right through to reading legal documents and doing accounting, which I know absolutely nothing about. So a little bit of everything.
Great. No, I appreciate that, because I think, what your story or your path shows, or should show for everybody listening, is that, it's possible for you. You can be about to get your PhD or in a postdoc, and you can go into this alternative career path of getting into the startup world. And really the startup world is an industry in itself, just like any other industry or any other type of field that you want to get into. You just start going to the conferences and meeting the people in the field, and this is how you transition into it. You leverage your same transferable skills and a lot of things we'll talk about today and so on. So I think
absolutely. And just maybe to add to that, I think I certainly remember as an outsider looking into the startup world and thinking, all these people are people who have wanted to start a startup their whole lives, or have know everything about it, have all these ideas. And the reality is that's not the case. Everyone's sort of just trying out new things, throwing together some good ideas, some bad ideas, giving them a go. So I know I was certainly slightly intimidated when I was starting from the outside, but there are so many people willing to sort of lend a helping hand. And you do realize at the end of the day, your abilities, your ideas are as good as the next person's.
Yeah, exactly. And I think especially in today's culture with, Shark Tank and entrepreneurship kind of being this glamorous thing, it's very easy to look at it and be like, wow, I could never do that. Or these people are, doing something really special when, in fact, all of you have the training you need to get in, get into a startup and be very successful. You certainly have the drive and you certainly are used to overcoming challenges. Before I get to my next question, just a little bit of inside information that I'll share with you guys who are here, that the Cheeky Scientist, when it very, very first came out long time ago, it was actually aimed at helping PhDs get into startup type positions. But what we found over time is that most PhDs want to get into corporate positions, certainly first. And, a lot of PhDs are very wired to, go after the biggest company and work for the biggest name, whether it's Pfizer, Amgen, whatever else. So I bring that up for this next question, which I think will help those listening determine whether or not, a startup versus working for a company, or especially a larger company, might be the right step for them. Maybe you can help us understand what are some of the challenges that you face, especially on a day-to-day basis, David, in a startup, versus the challenges, some of these people you might know, obviously, if you're involved in certain incubators or whatever else, Johnson & Johnson, the challenges that these corporations face. What are some of the differences in terms of challenges?
Yeah, I think that they're really two very different worlds. I mean, probably the easiest and the most important right at the start is risk. If you take on a job in a big corporation, you maybe have some level of security, and that's a standard job. You're going to get a salary. There's going to be a research program. In a startup, at times we're sort of living day to day. Will we get that next grant? Will we get an investment? Will we have enough money to do the experiments, let alone pay ourselves a salary?
Sounds slightly like academia.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. There is this sort of false idea that academia is this super safe, or safer than a startup as far as career, and especially in the current climate, I'm not sure that that's true. But so that, that's certainly one thing, and similarly, in a big corporation, maybe if your research project fails, the corporation goes on, and there may be other projects for you work on. For us and in many startups, you're very focused on a single project or a single sort of line of investigation. And if for whatever reason, whether that be logistical or scientific, it fails, often that might cause the company to fold. And then, maybe with relatively short notice, you could find yourself out of a job. So I think, that's a big thing and one to consider. I think, and if you're risk averse, maybe a negative. On the flip side, I mean, one of the fantastic things about working in a startup is really getting exposure to a huge number of things. Like I mentioned before, that involves doing the science, thinking about the ideas, pitching to investors, doing legal things. So you really get a very broad picture of things, which you may not get in a larger company. And similarly, you really get to set the agenda. So you're the person that's deciding, I think this is the most important question for us to ask at the moment. How do we answer that? And again, that might be different to a big corporation where you have a very sort of defined question or research project, which is handed down from your superiors, and that's your job.
Yeah, and so just a lot of great insights there. And for those of you listening, I mean, especially if you've come to this live, you're definitely considering what it might be like to work in a startup company. I think that this idea that there's more risk or whatever else, it is kind of it's a little bit false. It's kind of a myth. Like David said, academia, there's a lot of risk. I mean, many of you know, a lot of the associates have it has to work for free, right? Or you run out of funding and you're in the middle of a postdoc, you have to go to another postdoc. Lots of risk. Even less funding, way less funding in academia than I would say for any field in terms of startups. And not only that, but even at companies, you might think, okay, you can really be let go of pretty quickly at a startup, or things change very fast. But at larger companies, you're working for certain departments, they can let you go very, very quickly too, right? If the bottom line isn't matching up to what they need, they can't let you go. So it really is about the same. And the walls between working for a large company versus working for startups, even versus working for academia, those walls are kind of going away. So there is a lot more crossover. And
I think maybe one thing to add to that is there is certainly this idea that if you go into a big corporation or even within universities, there's this great structure of other people around you and mentors and things like that have experience. You're employed by someone who's superior to you and has a lot more experience, so you can learn from them. The one thing I'd say, at least from my experience, that was something I was potentially a little bit apprehensive about going into the startup. I've found so many of those people, whether they be from big corporations or, past entrepreneurs themselves, are so willing to give time and their expertise to us as sort of young people having a go at building this company. So actually, I think the access we've had to mentors in pharma, venture capital, in academics, all of these sort of things has surpassed probably what we would have had anywhere else.
No, that's good to know. Yeah, and I mean, especially if you're in a startup and surrounded by other startups and clusters, good mentors, you can get a lot of help, more mentorship than you might even get currently in academia or in a large company, like you said. So I want to narrow in a little bit on R&D and maybe talk about differences between, from your experience or what you've seen, differences between working in R&D at a large company versus working in R&D at a startup, such as your own startup or other startups you've seen.
Yeah, certainly. I think the major thing for me is, especially, I saw this, I guess, especially in academia, was you do have a certain amount of freedom to go and ask interesting questions and questions that surround your topic. So you might be doing a line of experiments or testing. Something comes up that looks interesting, and you have a reasonable amount of freedom to sort of go and chase that and figure out, whether that's worth pursuing. I'd say for us and the projects we've been running, we have especially at the moment because we're small, we have a very tight budget and a very strict budget, and that's very much to answer a question which takes us along the path to gaining the commercial assets that we're looking to build. And so quite often, little things happen, we're not quite sure why, and maybe they would be really interesting to go and investigate further. But we really spend, both Joe and I, quite a lot of time, checking each other and keeping ourselves on track. And I think, that can be as a sort of natural, intuitive and inquisitive scientist, that can sometimes be frustrating. But the flip side is you're very focused on doing the work that you need to do to get the answer you started out asking. So I think, that's a difference that I've certainly noticed.
No, that's good. So yeah, and that makes sense. Some of the people on here had a question in terms of the day to day. So if we could do the compare and contrast one more time, what is like your day look like in terms of, or I should say, at your startup or the startups you work on, you've seen where they run efficiently. What do the days look like? I mean, how are there a lot of meetings compared to larger companies? Fewer meetings, different types of meetings? maybe you can talk a little bit about some of those differences.
Yeah, certainly. I think, I mean, from my experience, and I'm very happy to hear others who've had different experience, but from mine, definitely a lot of meetings, but very eclectic mixes. So as mentioned, most days will start with going into the lab and starting an experiment or doing some actual wet work in the lab. But then in between, we might be incubating some step, and you'll run up and you'll have a half-hour call with the lawyers who are working on an investment or a collaboration agreement, and then back into the lab, and then run back out for a call with a mentor from a pharma company who's talking to us about what are the newest sort of drug targets which might be interesting for us to investigate and look at further. And then even beyond that, then in the afternoon, often darting across to another lab or another group or even another city to speak to people about what they're doing, how what they do might interact with the work we're doing, the research we're doing. Certainly for us, we're doing early stage drug discovery and different technologies and even other very small startups have new innovative technologies that can work together with us. And often it's the combination of those things which could be really exciting.
No, that's great. No, those are great insights. And you talked a little bit about sometimes the budget being tight and setting up collaboration. So I want to delve into both of those, starting with the funding. So maybe you could, assuming, let's say there's some PhDs on, and very likely that have no idea how startups work, how they get funding. Maybe you can talk about how most startups get funding, what different types of funding are available, and how this affects the day-to-day of working at a startup.
Absolutely. So maybe just as a bit of context, how we did and what we did, we really got very lucky. We entered a competition called the One Start competition, which maybe very many of you have heard of. It's a life science business plan competition, which is run now around the world. And ultimately the prize of that, the winner in Europe gets 100,000 British pounds, and in the US gets 150,000 US dollars. So really the reason almost for starting the company was in response to that competition. We thought, if we could win that money, that would be a huge boost and we'd be able to do all this work that we've sort of been thinking about. So we entered that competition in the UK, so the European arm of it, and made it through to the final, which was the top 10. And then another team won. And so we didn't get any prize money from that, which was, in some respects, that was devastating, but that's actually not really the case. It was such a fantastic experience for meeting other startups, meeting mentors. So we actually gained a huge amount, and most importantly,
the network you gained was worth it.
Absolutely, and I'd say the first step really for anyone looking to start something is slowly building that network. But and from that we got really lucky, and Johnson & Johnson Innovation approached us, and they were starting a incubation scheme that had a little bit of investment associated with it. And so from that we got a investment from Johnson & Johnson Innovation to start and try out our idea. And so at that stage, we were really just an idea. We were two guys who had come together, shooting from the hip a bit, with a bit of hot air, but an idea and a justification of why it should work. So we, got lucky in that respect. That certainly, I'm the first to admit that was luck, and so that can't happen for everyone. And so maybe just some words on the other kind of funding that are out there that we've looked at as well, often failing to get, but certainly number one is grant funding. So just like in academia, there are grants available for small companies. They may be country specific or much more broad, and they're really the ultimate because they're free money. You get the grant and then you spend it on the research project and program. Beyond that, it's more looking at the investment type side of things. Obviously, before investment, there are things like loans that you can take. Loans obviously get risky, especially for us in biotech, where the failure rate of companies is extremely high. There are very few banks out there willing to give biotech companies loans. But what there are, investment firms, especially early stage investment firms, that will do things like give convertible notes. So they'll give a sort of a loan which changes into equity or a percentage of the company if the company continues and succeeds. Options, which is effectively giving you some money so that in a later stage, when you're raising money a second time, for example, they have the option to invest at that stage. And then right through to a proper investment where they say, look, I want to buy 30% of your company and I'll give you X dollars, however many, for that. And so really all of those options, and we've explored a lot of them. We've had grant funding in the past, which we've been very grateful to get, and we're just at the moment closing a equity funding round. So where a venture capital firm is buying a percentage of the company for an investment.
Oh, wow. Okay. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that. So I'm curious about these collaborations. First with Johnson & Johnson, what does that look like to somebody who has no idea? I mean, how do you answer to them? What is their role? What is your role? And then we can move on to the venture capital.
Yeah. So, I mean, Johnson & Johnson really has a fantastic scheme which they've been setting up over the last few years to foster early stage new innovative ideas. And the key reason for this is major pharma companies are starting to see that a huge amount of the new discoveries and innovation are actually not coming from the bowels of these huge corporations, but are coming from small, fast-moving, innovative startups. And so J&J is trying to get on that, and they're forming these innovation centers. So our relationship, obviously in the first instance, we got some money, which was fantastic. But beyond that, and the most important thing I really think that we've got from them is access to speaking to their R&D people. So we have a contact in the Innovation Center who's our sort of mentor. So we have meetings with them every couple of weeks. And that's very much in a mentoring capacity. So, hey guys, how can I help you this week? But importantly, that often involves us saying, look, we're thinking about doing a discovery program against this cancer target. Could we talk to one of your oncologists who work in, for example, bowel cancer? Mm-hmm. And they go, yep, and set up a call. And then we talk to them about, the ideas we're having, how we're thinking about developing the product. Are there any sort of unforeseen issues in that space that we as not particularly experienced people just haven't even thought of? And so that's really been fantastic. So it's really been going back to this network and mentoring idea, it's really been beneficial to build us in that respect.
Great. Got a couple questions come in. We'll get to those in a minute. So I guess that sheds some light on what this kind of mentoring between a Johnson & Johnson larger company and the startup looks like. So you did mention that you had some venture capitalists come into the equation. Maybe you could talk about how did they approach you? Did you approach them? How did it work? And what do they get? What do you get? Maybe you can discuss and help demystify that relationship a little bit, assuming the people listening have never set up such a deal.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, one of the things that everyone always said to us, and I guess I partly was skeptical of, is raising money will take a really long time. And I guess I was under no illusion that it would be easy or anything like that. But everyone's sort of saying, it'll take 9 to 12 months from the time you start a conversation with someone to having money in the bank. And I sort of was scratching my head thinking, how could it possibly take that long? How much is there to do? But if we look back now at our last 9 to 12 months, that's exactly what has happened. So almost a year ago, we had our first sort of meeting with this investor. We had been put in touch with them by someone that we'd met at a networking event. So someone we'd been talking to about, our ideas. They said, oh, you should speak to this venture capital firm. They're looking for companies like yours. So in the very first instance, it was just a meeting over a coffee where we had a quick discussion about what we did. And then through that process over the last maybe 9-ish months, it's gone through the whole process from doing a formal presentation to a single, the sort of life science lead in that firm, through to doing a larger presentation in front of a number of people. We then discuss in detail the details of the project and what we're planning to do, how much money we need to do that. And that was a bit of a to and fro. So, they came up with some ideas, we came up with some ideas, and we developed that. And then ultimately, throughout that process, the sort of our key point there became comfortable, became convinced that they liked what we were doing and it was worth them taking further. They then present a whole case about the company, the plan, the investment, how much money to their company, so to the venture capital firm, to get approval. That large firm has then approved the investment, and so now we're in the process of going through all the sort of legal nitty-gritty. So, and that comes to the second part of your question, what exactly they get and what we get. So the first question, and this was partly answered before, was how much money we need. And then the real negotiation there was about, okay, so what percentage of the company do they get for that amount of money? And this is, everyone says, for an early stage startup, that question's a bit like how long is a piece of string. It really depends. And so, for companies at our stage, we'd been going about 12 to 18 months already. We had some data in the bag. Valuations for companies like that sort of, I guess, are between $500,000 US and, probably $2 million US, the upper end. And that's a very early stage company, but with some data behind it. And now we're sort of in the final legal stages, which is issues like, who's going to be on the board? What are the voting rights? So if an issue comes up, who gets to vote on what and who gets to veto what, and sort of all these little technicalities, which, to be honest, I'd never thought about or considered. But when you think about it, they're the things that have the potential to change the way your company goes. So they are actually pretty important.
Thank you for joining us for another Industry Careers for PhDs podcast. If you're interested in attending one of these interviews live, or if you're interested in getting access to the full interview, including all of the background materials and show notes, go to cheekyscientist.com/association and learn how to become an associate. You can get on the waitlist for the next association enrollment period there and learn full details about the program. It's a program specifically designed to help PhDs transition into top industry positions. If you would like to receive more of these interview highlights via our podcast sent directly to your email, go to cheekyscientist.com and email subscribe under where it says Start Here. If you haven't already, you can also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Until next week, remember your value as a PhD and start thinking and acting like a successful industry professional.